to add corporate devices to Azure Active Directory using Azure AD join. There are a few configuration steps that need to be completed. If the settings are not configured correctly, you'll experience Azure AD join issues. Let's review some of the required settings in Azure AD. Each Azure AD tenant will be set using an official domain name of your domain on Microsoft.com. However, most organizations will want to create a custom domain name, which is an alias to this, so that you can use a recognizable login name for your users, such as Megan@contoso-electronics.com. You can use the Azure AD Admin Center to create the custom domain name, and then you'll need to add the Azure AD DNS information to your domain host. If the DNS records do not exist in your domain hosting partner, then devices and users will not be able to connect to the services via Azure Active Directory using your custom domain. The next step is to manage IP addresses and port numbers. Whenever we use the internet, there is a risk of hacking attacks and viruses. Therefore, internet connections are typically protected by using a firewall. You'll need to configure IP addresses and port numbers to allow Azure AD related traffic to pass through the firewall. Azure AD Connect and Azure AD both use port 80 and HTTP port 443. If you're already using other Microsoft Cloud services, such as Office 365 or Microsoft 365, then this setup step should have already been completed. To review the technical reference information on the required ports and protocols for implementing Azure AD Connect in a hybrid scenario, you should review the information on screen. Next, you need to grant permission to allow devices to be joined to Azure Active Directory. This can be done by configuring the users may join devices to Azure Active Directory setting within the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. The setting can be set to none, where no one is allowed to join a device. Selected where any user added to a list can join devices or all, which allows all users that authenticate to join their devices to Azure AD. If you also want to allow Azure AD to auto-enroll join devices into Intune, then you'll need to configure another setting in the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. Without this setting configured, mobile device management or MDM enrollment can fail. This setting unit configure is the MDM user scope, and the options here are none, where MDM auto-enrollment will be disabled. Some where Windows 10 devices can be auto-enrolled for selected users, or all where all users who authenticate can be enrolled into MDM. And in the same area, you'll need to authorize your mobile device management service in Azure AD. There are 3 URLs that you need to enter the MDM Terms of Use URL so that your users can view your terms of use before they enroll their devices. Mobile Device Management Discovery URL so that Azure AD knows what to find your MDM service, and the MDM Compliance URL. This is used when a device is denied access. You can display information to your users to explain why their device is not compliant and where they can find help to resolve the issue. You can also manage the same settings for the Mobile Application Management or MAM2, but you can ignore the 3 MAM URLs that are located here. Finally, you need to ensure that all of your users have a valid user account in Azure AD. Otherwise, they will not be able to join their device, as the initial user authentication process will fail. Let's drop onto our demo environment and see how to manage settings for Azure Active Directory. I've logged onto my Microsoft 365 Admin Center, and then on the left-hand side, I'll click Show All, and then select Azure Active Directory. Under Favorites, I'll select Azure Active Directory, and then under Manage, I'll scroll down and click Custom Domain Names. And here we can see 2 domain names that are in use for my tenant. The first one relates to the initial domain that was created, and I set up my cloud services with Microsoft. The second, Contoso Electronics, is my custom domain name, which I've made primary for this tenant. If I wanted to add an additional custom domain, I'd select the Add Custom Domain from the menu, and then enter the name of my custom domain. Next, I want to check the setting which allows users to join their devices to Azure Active Directory. On the left-hand side, under Manage, I'll select Devices, and then select Device Settings. Here we can see that various settings for allowing users to join their devices to my tenant. The setting is currently configured to all, and I'm happy with this, so I don't need to make any changes. If instead I wanted to choose Selected, I can then add a list of members or a group of members who I want to join their devices. I'll select them from the list, and then click OK. In this way, I'll restrict the setting just to those members. I can also configure the setting to None, which will disable the ability for devices to be joined to Azure Active Directory. I'll return to the All setting. We can also configure if we want to allow users to become local administrators on Azure AD joined devices. This may be useful for members of your IT team. You'll also notice at the bottom there's a setting to limit the maximum number of devices per user that they can register or join to Azure Active Directory. Let's configure this to 10. I'll now click Save. The device settings are updated, and I'll return to the Overview page. The next setting that I want to configure is the MDM user scope. Under Manage, I'll select Mobility, MDM, and MAM, and then select Microsoft Intune. Here we can see the settings that allow Azure AD to automatically enroll devices into Intune. The first setting is the MDM user scope, and here we have the option to select All, Some, or None. I'll select All because I want any user who joins their device to Azure AD to be also enrolled into Intune. I can also check the URLs for the MDM terms of use. Discovery and compliance have all been entered correctly. We can also manage the MAM or Mobile Application Management user scope. Again, I'll leave this set to All, and I don't need to configure the URLs for MAM.